do you want to hit the record button? There we go. This session is being recorded. Okay. Well, welcome once again. And Kim, we're just delighted that you're here with us today to tell us a little bit more about what Enterprising Nonprofits does and has to offer. And wonderful. It looks like Joel just logged on as well. Welcome, Joel. And perhaps what we could do, Suzanne, do you maybe just want to give a brief update on the Child Thrive initiative so that Kim knows sort of where we're at as we're moving forward into the conversation she's about to offer? Would that be helpful to you, Kim?
Sure. Yeah, I have a little bit of an update, but if there's anything more to add, then I'm happy to hear what's going on.
Okay, great. Suzanne, do you feel comfortable just speaking to that briefly as we get started here?
Yeah, so Kim, I updated you after the Doing Good for Nothing event, which Simon was a part of, as Catherine mentioned. And since then, we had a social enterprise webinar last Tuesday with Rob Middleman from Royal Roads University. And he raised some really important questions for the team about having a champion who is ready to launch the social enterprise and really dedicate their time and energy to getting a business started and up and running and making a profit. So, and those were conversations that I had with my colleague Elena as well, because I was really, really excited after the Doing Good for Nothing event and the brainstorming. And I'm really excited to get a business started. So yesterday we had a team meeting and I just said, you know, it's me. I'm the champion. I'm ready to do this. And everybody was really happy to hear about that. Now, we had 3 business ideas at the Doing Good for Nothing event that we presented. And one of them has been actually developed by the executive director, Philip Cook, and Michelle Cook, the capacity director. They've been working with investors for the development with purpose idea. And they will continue working on that themselves, like starting a business with different partners. And so right now they're at the stage where they're looking for support to create a business plan, because basically there are investors and there are people interested. There's a real estate developer interested in that idea, but they want to see how can we offer something like a service or product that can make money. So they have ideas around that. It's really about putting it into a business plan and using that business terminology. And my colleague Elaine and I were actually really excited at this moment to start the CSR certification process, mainly because we think it also relates to the other 2 ideas and could potentially relate to any other business ventures in the future. And we think it's important to have this concept of, certifying a business as a Child Thrive business beforehand. So what we're looking at is there a market demand for this product? And so that's one thing that we're running into. We need to do some market research. And the other thing that we discussed as a team is, up until now, we haven't really had time to develop an enterprise idea. We've just been doing it off the side of our desks, and we haven't even had time as a team to fully, brainstorm until the Doing Good for Nothing event. And it's because we're all so busy with the programming and running the organization and everything else. So basically, I offered to transition out of my role in the nonprofit and into, an entrepreneurial role. And so we're looking at ways how to make that happen, also for Elena to find ways in which we can still, pay the bills. So finding some kind of seed funding to start for startup costs, and so that we can continue surviving while we start up the business. Basically that's where we're at right now. So lots of things happening really quickly. We're ready to launch. And we're just running into a few stumbling blocks, so to speak, of our next steps. Just let me know if you have any questions, because I know that was, a short summary of everything that's happened.
No, that's good. That's good.
That's wonderful. And actually, it's amazing how quickly things have moved forward. So Kim, does that give you enough to sort of launch into your talk here? If so, I can switch over to your PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, my presentation is pretty broad in terms of scope, as it's one that we tend to go back to when we're presenting to boards or the business community. So it is a higher level overview, I would say, but it certainly does. It might spark some ideas for some of the challenges you'll be facing. I find it interesting that you're saying ready to launch and things have been moving quickly, because that never happens. So I'm curious to know if that continues that way, or if, if the stumbling that we're familiar with is still ahead of you. But I'm happy to get into the presentation then if
okay.
everyone's ready.
Sure, that's great. I wonder if we can just, Joel, I noticed that you logged in. Welcome. Glad you're here. Would you just like to say a quick hello and perhaps let others on the line know who you are and why you care about this conversation?
Hi, sure, yeah. My name's Joel with an organization called Plan in Vancouver, but I'm working in Victoria. And I just saw the invite come up, and it just sort of caught my eye, so I thought I'd hop on it just a minute ago. So, yeah, just curious to listen in and hear the presentation.
That's great, Joel. And is this Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network?
That's the one, yep.
It's an organization I know well.
There you go.
Welcome. Great to have you here. And so, Kim, without any further ado, I think we'll just jump on over. Now, I did send a little bio around of yourself, but perhaps, you know, you might just want to say a couple of words if you feel comfortable doing so, and I'll jump onto your slide deck here.
That's great. And you can just go to the next slide, because that's where I'll get into. So yeah, again, my name is Kim Buxa, and I'm the program manager of Enterprising Nonprofits, which is actually a provincial program that goes around the province offering workshops and resources and information, as well as some small matching grants to nonprofits that are looking to plan or develop social enterprise. So you can see from that slide that's up there, we've got a variety of funders across the province. So my background is I've got a business background with a degree, and then on top of that I also have a Master's of International Relations and Development that I pursued after I had worked in a large corporation for a number of years and kind of got tired of working for the man, as the case often is, I think. So then I came back and got into the nonprofit sector and stumbled upon this crazy thing called social enterprise. So which is actually a perfect merge of my business brain and my heart and my conscience of supporting impact and community impact specifically. So that's a little bit about me. So I've been here for, I think I'm coming up on 5 years. And it's been great. I was here on a 1-year contract, and I told them I was never going to leave, and here we are 5 years later. So still very much enjoy it, and get to be inspired every day by what nonprofits are doing in our communities. So you can see from that, the slide that's up, that again, we're a provincial organization, but we're not a program, but we're not provincially funded in terms of government funding. So we receive the majority of our funding from the Vancouver Foundation and the Van City Community Foundation, which are both provincial funders, regardless of what their name suggests. And then of course, the other partner in there is Van City itself, the credit union. And we also have had, and our funders change all the time. So we've always been collaborative from the beginning, which is about 20 years ago. We had started out with three supporters, and 2 of those stay with us still to today. And over the course of those 20 years, the supporters have come and gone and changed, and we still have relationships with all of them. But of course, everyone's funding streams evolve and change. So we also have Northern Development Trust as a longtime funder for when we originally moved out of Metro Vancouver. We went into the north, and they stepped up. And you can see Columbia Basin Trust on there. We've also had Southern Interior Trust in the Okanagan, and different corporate sponsors and supporters such as Capital One, which is up there, and we work very closely with groups like TELUS and KPMG. And then you can see that maple flag there, that the maple leaf there, that we do receive some funding from the federal government right now because of the success we've had with this program in BC. We've gone into a contract to expand it across Canada, so the program does exist in almost every province at this point. Next slide, please. So what is social enterprise?
Sorry, a little.
Horrible. Yeah, what is social enterprise? So that's a big question out there these days, and the terminology is constantly changing, and the definition has changed, and it's always been kind of a stumbling block, unfortunately, in the past. And I think we're all kind of at the point of just get on with it and do the good stuff that you're doing, and understand that there's a business component in there. So for us, traditionally, it's meant a nonprofit owning or operating a business, which is obviously selling a good or service that's ultimately contributing back to their overall mission and allowing them to do what it is they need to do or want to do in their community. Like I said, it's a sticky terminology, and when I first got into the sector, I certainly had to Google it and look it up, and even still till today, my friends and family have no clue what I do. Mostly think that I do some thrift store stuff. So there is a lot of confusion out there, but ultimately it is a social good component with a business enterprise component. If you go on the next slide, I'll show you all of the different types of organizations these days that are now being called social enterprises, or what a couple of years ago might have been social impact businesses or social ventures. So you can see they fall on both sides of the for and the nonprofit side. Ultimately having some kind of social or local component. So we've always had green and Aboriginal businesses, women entrepreneurs and local businesses are gaining a lot of attention these days, along with co-ops, which have been around forever but are getting a new life, so to speak, these days. And then you've got social business and social enterprise, which are essentially a merge of the for and or nonprofit common terminology. So next slide. So for us, ultimately, because I reside in a nonprofit, I reside within the Van City Community Foundation. So we're under a charitable organization. So this is a good way to kind of think about the definition of the person that you might be using when you're talking about social enterprises. If you're talking to somebody on the charitable or the nonprofit side, it's likely they're sticking to our traditional definition of a nonprofit business. But if you're talking to someone from government or education or the for-profit side, then it's very likely that they have a broader definition, which includes all of those ideas that I just put up there. So for us, it really is a verb. So as much as we refer to a social enterprise as an entity, for nonprofits, it really is a verb. It's a tool, one of the many tools in the toolkit that is ultimately generating some revenue for you, so that you can do what it is you want to do. It's very rare that nonprofits say, oh, I want to be a social enterprise. It's usually, I want to accomplish something. I need to serve my members. How can I generate some dollars to do that, right? So again, it's more of a verb. So we should be saying enterprising, which is, I guess, coming back to our name, enterprising nonprofits, rather than a noun of a social enterprise. And so next slide. So why do nonprofits typically start? And where can you find them? They really exist in every kind of business. So any kind of business sector that you can think of, there's likely a nonprofit that's generating revenue or doing business activities in that sector. And you can see all of them up there, all the different examples, and there's many more than that. A lot of employment ones, again, of course, are typically in low skill, low entry, broad markets. So you see landscaping, catering, recycling, maintenance, retail, manufacturing. Those are traditionally employment-based social enterprises, right? So low skill, trainable, gaining access to employment. And then you've got a little bit more on the market need of recreation, car shares, arts, healthcare, of course, is a big one that nonprofits are taking space these days. And then you have other ones like food security. So really anything and everything is where a nonprofit business could exist in every sector. And they likely exist in BC already. So it's hard to be socially innovative when they exist, but it's really about being, what I say is about being community innovation, and looking at what's working in other areas and seeing how it could apply to your immediate community or a community that you live or work or play within. So next slide. Of course, all of those activities are done for an array of community impact, noticing that there's usually a gap. And a lot of that, as I was saying with employment, it typically comes back to social isolation or social inclusion, right? In which case we're talking about youth or seniors or individuals with disabilities, ensuring that they have full access to all of the different aspects of our community, including education and employment, healthcare. Naturally, we want access to culture and social inclusion and food security and all that good stuff. And ultimately, it does go back into economic development, which I think is often forgot about, that nonprofits do produce economic value, and certainly social enterprises do. Next slide. And I should say, if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me or ask. Otherwise, I'm on auto giving this presentation a number of times a year. So.
That's great, Kim. Thank you. And perhaps if others have a question, just interject, because I can't necessarily see. Maybe I can see if people turn their mic on, I can see, but otherwise just interject. That's great, Kim. Otherwise,
yeah, please do. And I think I can see the texting too, so if that's easier, you don't want to totally interrupt me, I think I can see the texting if you're texting from the toolbar there. So when we talk about social enterprise, and again, this is really on for or nonprofit side, but my view and perspective is skewed to the nonprofit, is ultimately you're talking about a blended value on return. So you need to be talking about both the social return or the social impact you're having, as well as what do the numbers look like. And of course, in a traditional manner for any kind of business, you would typically only be talking about financial return. It'd be very rare for you to turn to a financial section of a newspaper and find anything about social return or social impact, unless you were seeing something negative. Usually it's something environmentally negative or employment negative, manufacturing, and so on. And traditionally for the nonprofits, of course, you're always talking about social return, reporting to funders or government contracts on how many people came through the door, how many clients you served, and excuse me, how many bums in the seats of the theater or through the door to the museum. So really, when we're talking about blended return, blended value, it's talking about both at all times. Social enterprises have to talk about both at all times, because they're literally blended together. And this is where, of course, nonprofits can often have the added perk in some ways of being able to talk about social impact more heavily if perhaps they're not as financially viable or having the major returns financially speaking. There's a significant amount of social return that you could be focused on. So you could talk about both. You can talk about them in different ways, obviously depending on the audience. You might want to talk a bit more about financial returns, and sometimes depending on other audience, you're going to talk about social return. But ultimately, you have to be talking about both. And it's also part of thinking about what is it that you actually do want to be talking about or want to be doing. And that's part of this conversation as well. Next slide. So if you flattened that quadrant graph out, it would basically look like this. The traditional down on the left there of the donations, so you're talking about the social return for the donations. And on the right, you're talking about the strictly seeking profit, for-profit financial return. So slowly over time, and in a great deal out of necessity, nonprofits, of course, have realized that they have something to offer, and it usually comes out of something they're doing well, and they could be charging for, people are asking for, and that's where we see fee for service. On the for-profit side, we started seeing corporate social responsibility a number of years ago, thanks to the environmental movement. And so that's where they started seeing that it's very rare now, obviously, that you would have a for-profit advocating that they only seek profit. Even if they do, they would never, ever, should never, and probably would never say that publicly, because of course that's just bad business to say that you don't care where you live or do your business. So slowly those two things have merged into the middle there, and that's why I say social enterprise and social responsible business are very common and interject in the middle there. Absolutely. You want to discuss this one more?
Sure. I just wanted to flag it before you asked to move to the next slide, but
sure.
Perhaps you were going to get here already, but what would you say, you know, some of what we've been discussing in some of our conversations at IICRD and frankly elsewhere is, you know, this idea, like you said at the beginning, often there's an idea that we have the capacity to offer fee for the services we already provide, rather than going out and seeking a grant, let's say, and having a grant so that we can do this. Could we somehow package the materials we have or the skills and expertise we know we have and offer that almost like consultants or fee for service, as you say? But it seems to me there's a nuanced difference between that kind of consulting or fee for service and, as you've got on the next part of the continuum here, the social enterprise. So what would you say is it about the core mandate of the business, or what would you, where would you say that line is?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and on the slides that are coming up, we'll get into it a little bit more. But certainly the fee for, and that's a good question, and we hear it all the time. When am I fee for service? When am I social enterprise? A fee for service, you're definitely in the spectrum of an enterprising nonprofit, right? You're looking at ways to generate revenue and cover your costs. I think fee for service falls into a little bit more of what Suzanne was talking about earlier, in which case it's done off the side of the desk. It's done in one-off situations. While you're enterprising, you're not a social enterpriser at that point. That really comes when, like you're saying, you've committed time and resources, made the commitment, have a business manager, are really kind of using the business as part of the strategy rather than the one-off and off the side of the desk. Does that?
Thanks. That's a great distinction. Yeah, and we can keep going. Obviously, further slides on this too. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for that. And so just to touch on that 3C that you can see under there, just because it's a new model here in BC that you may be hearing about, it's important that you can see that I have it tucked under the for-profit side of it. So it's definitely a for-profit model, but as the name suggests, it has a component that's for the community. So there's a designated split, a minimum split that these businesses essentially have to give back to the community. And the minimum is a 60-40 split. So minimum 60% has to go back to the community, while the 40% could be distributed, which normally you can't do in a nonprofit. Obviously, you can't distribute profit or shares, but this 40% of them could. So it's the newer version of socially responsible business or corporate social responsibility. The difficulty with it is that it's a BC model. It's not recognized by federal level, including taxation. There's no tax relief there. And at a provincial level, unfortunately, it's still, and I hope this is going to change, but I might be giving too much credit to the government, but that there's a significant amount of reporting attached to the 3C that while it's a good option, it makes it a little bit harder for certain organizations and individuals to pursue it as an incorporation model. So, but I do believe that will change in the coming years as the research or the reports come into the government and they figure out how they actually want to see this model being utilized in the communities. So next slide. So I just wanted to, at that, stop for a second, and again, and this is really another way of kind of looking at that last slide and even the quadrant, and just get clear on some of the structures that we're talking about. So you've got nonprofits, of course, which are societies, associations, all of those fall into that. And then you've got charities, which charities are nonprofits that have charitable status. So all charities are nonprofits, but not all nonprofits are charities. Nonprofits, as I was just saying, are incorporated normally at a provincial level. There are some that are at a federal level, and it's an incorporation designation, while charitable status is done at a federal level, and it's specific to CRA and revenue and taxation. So two different governments, two different purposes. Like I said, you don't need to say a nonprofit charity because that's inherent. You can just say charity. Then you've got cooperatives that are on the for-profit and the nonprofit side, and like I said, I think we're seeing that more and more. And then you've got sole proprietors, which is you owning a business or me owning a business. In the sense of social enterprise, a nonprofit or a charity could own a social enterprise. Similar to a partnership, we could go in partnership together, same as a nonprofit and or a charity could go in partnership together. And ultimately, at that point, you're owning a for-profit corporation. So anyone could establish or own a for-profit corporation, or that 3C, which I had just talked about, which is why that's tucked under there, under the for-profit again. Okay, next slide.
Yep. I just wonder if Suzanne is saying I could add a bit to this for the purpose of our case study. And I wonder, you know, thinking from a governance level, I wonder, maybe you get into this later in the presentation. I don't want to preempt you, but
That's
maybe
okay.
Suzanne could say a couple of words here about what we're thinking in terms of how to partner IICRD, or what the governance structure would look like for IICRD and the Child Thrive initiative. Suzanne, do you want to jump in for a moment here?
Yeah, sorry, I do. Just also referring back to the last slide, because we do actually do quite a bit of fee-for-service. The organization is hired by international non-profit organizations such as UNICEF, Save the Children, Plan International, World Vision, to do specific projects around the world. And and so part of that revenue also comes to the organization, and then part of that is subcontracted to our associates. So what we're moving into is really finding a for-profit structure that gives us a little bit more flexibility, because we do have charitable status. So from what I understand is that with charitable status, you're not allowed to actually earn profits or earn revenues or have shares or anything like that. So, and I was just curious about the nonprofit partnering with an individual or owning a business. Is that taking a risk to lose the charitable status?
Well, it depends if you're talking about the nonprofit or the charity. So a charity could have a business owned or operated within itself, and then there's regulations around that that you need to be aware of. You could certainly partner, but again, there's some ideas that you want to think about. In terms of charitable status, like you're saying, charitable status is the most restricted in terms of what you can do with your dollars, while a nonprofit is somewhere between a for-profit and a charity. So a for-profit, of course, is the most flexible with what they can decide to do with their dollars and their activities. Right. Charitable organizations are the least flexible, and nonprofits are in the middle. So it really is, like you're saying, kind of things these days are moving forward to look at how to use at least two, if not all three of those structures together to achieve all of the different goals that you're wanting to achieve. So you could start the business under the charitable status. If you're already doing the fee-for-service you're talking about, you are already a social enterprise, whether you realize it or not. That makes you a social enterprise. It sounds like it's well beyond a fee-for-service. It sounds like it's part of your strategy. It sounds like it's an ongoing activity. It's not done off the side of your desk. So in that sense, that is already social enterprising, right, at its finest, that most organizations might not call it that. It's just something they've always done, you know, and that's the case certainly we see in other organizations. But you could have it within, and if you were partnering it, if you're partnering with another person in terms of a partnership, then we're looking at an owned situation, right? Not an operated situation. So once you get into an owned situation, again, the regulations are a little bit different, and it wouldn't be compromising your charitable status.
Right. Yeah, I think that one of the reasons we would like to start a for-profit is, that it gives us that flexibility of generating profit without endangering the charitable status. And one of the ideas we had for both of our business ideas that we're developing is to bring back revenues to the organization through that fee-for-service model. For example, with the CSR development, so developing the tool, providing the training to businesses, and doing the certification assessment. Those are all things that we could do as fee for service. Right. So employing the nonprofit and the associates we have in our organization to do that work. And right. Any profits that are generated remain with the for-profit organization, because otherwise the charity might lose its status. So that's sort of, one of the ideas we've been playing with.
No, that's not how it would work. No, all of the profits of the for-profit would go back to the charity if the charity owns the for-profit.
Okay, so that's not endangering.
It could stay with the for-profit. Absolutely, it could stay with the for-profit. But if it's being owned by that charity, then really, the expectation is those dollars are going to be sold back to the charity. Otherwise, why are the two linked that way?
Right. To fund other programming.
Right. Right. Yeah. But you would likely be seeing the once you're profitable, if you're profitable, all of those dollars should be going back to the charity if that's the owner.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So does
interesting.
That, this is
like I said, again, as a for-profit, you probably want to talk to a lawyer at that point. But again, what would be the point in holding the dollars at the for-profit? Nobody's benefiting at that point, right? Mm-hmm. The whole intent was that those dollars go back to the charitable purpose, which means they have to go back to the charity. Yeah.
Kim, this strikes me as a key issue, and as you said, we will obviously need to engage a lawyer down the road as we flesh out the details. But what would you? I know you've got many other slides to get through, but this is sort of a question that has come up many times in terms of governance. What would you say is there a sort of a way that you would recommend, or is there a way that most nonprofits who are endeavoring to start a social enterprise wing beyond the fee-for-service that we're already doing, is there a recommended way or a normal way that people would approach that? Is it generally through the charity owning the business, or is it through a partnership? Is it
Unfortunately, to answer your questions, the answers are no and no. There's no recommended way to do it, and there's no best practice, right?
Gotcha.
It ultimately depends on the goals of the organization, which we're going to talk about a little bit, right? So again, if you're basically from what you just said, from what Suzanne just said in terms of the activities that this business is intending to do, none of them, from what I heard, really have a social component, let alone a charitable component. They are strictly for making profit, in which case those activities ultimately would need to be held outside of the charity. So whether that's in a for-profit that's standalone, that maybe some of your stakeholders come together to incorporate, or that it's incorporated and owned by your charity, it's outside, right? And it's especially when you're saying the purpose is to make money. Right off the bat, has to be outside.
Right. Of course, creating child-friendly organizations is in line with our overall mission, but
right. So some of those, that's ultimately where it is, right? So that's a good deciding point. But the questions that the areas that you always need to think about, and this is before you go to the lawyers, and same as they'll tell you the same thing that I'm telling you, that you have to figure out where the money's coming from, where the money's going, and what the money's doing. What it's intended to do, right? Figuring out those three things are ultimately going to tell you which structure or structures you need to work within. Yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess the social component of this enterprise idea is more, having social impact, creating businesses, developments, communities that are child-centered and child-friendly. Is it's a social impact. It's a transformational impact rather than charitable dollars going to a specific group of people.
Right, but again, that's an impact of it, right? The output of it is dollars, right? Like, so that again, like I think, ultimately it ripples to that, but the ultimate goal of the enterprise is not that. The goal of the enterprise, from what you're saying, is to make money. Right?
Yeah.
The goal of the nonprofit and the charity is to do the impact stuff. And that's, again, it's where and how is the money going to be used that helps you decide that structure, right?
Right.
And that, like I said, it'll come up. That's the hardest decision. I think it's coming up if you can flip forward. I'm not sure. So that, like, yeah, I mean, that's a huge conversation, right? It's not something that, I mean, I could stop the presentation, we could go into Q&A, but it's not really, you know, it's difficult to be getting into it if we're still going to do this presentation. So it is a much bigger conversation, right?
Yeah, we can hear that.
It's an hour, it's an hour conversation without the presentation. So if we're trying to do both. Totally valid though, right? Totally valid to be thinking about it. But that's the snag that most charities, so remember how I said at the beginning that it was moving nicely, you said it was moving at a quick pace and that you guys were making strides. So this is that's one of the snags, right? Is ultimately deciding what it is you're wanting to achieve and how that could look in terms of business and social blended value, right? So if we I feel like we've kind of talked about this, but again, you can see that I have fee-for-service under kind of a traditional and the more social enterprise model because it is an enterprising opportunity, right? So you are starting to be entrepreneurial and make those dollars go further. And then you start getting into the other three boxes, which for us are all social enterprise successes. And that means that your programs or activities could be subsidizing programs and activities within your nonprofit. You could be self-sustaining. So if you're subsidizing, obviously you're covering some of the costs, but not all of the costs. A good example would be you're covering the expenses, but not the salaries, perhaps. Self-sustaining, you might be covering the expenses and the salaries associated with program delivery or that business activity. And of course, then you ultimately have profitable, which is very, very hard to do. And even nonprofits or social enterprises that think they're in that category are usually not. They forget about things that are being provided in kind, whether it's space or electricity or admin. But any one of those three, or even possibly four if you include fee-for-service, are social enterprising models. And ideally, you're in those subsidized or stretching and self-sustaining one. When you're talking about being a separately owned entity, that's usually where you get to be in the profitable and say that you are strictly seeking profit. As I said, most organizations would never say, but as a charity, you could, knowing that all those dollars are going back to a charitable mission and activities. Okay, next slide. So again, I've already kind of talked about this, about why nonprofits would start social enterprise, and it's usually to fill a need in the community or a need in the marketplace, but typically a need in the community, right? Going back to serving a targeted community group or population or demographic. Then you have the alternative of strictly supporting your mission, and of course many of them are going into it for financial returns. As you can see, all three, there's market, mission, and money. So kind of same as that original blended value that we talk about, the social return as well as the financial, so the mission and the money. And then in between that is the market, right? And that's ultimately how you're going to decide which one you're talking about more in that blended value. So social enterprise, again, this is your blended value. You need to be thinking about all three, but the hardest decision and the one thing you have to do is decide which one of these is the priority. And that's the snag that I think that you guys are at right now, or working through in terms of structure. Is it's this snag. You need to figure out which one is your ultimate priority. And it seems so easy because there's only three choices. How hard could it possibly be? And it's the hardest choice. It's the hardest decision that any organization in the planning and the developing stages will go through. And even when you think you've got everyone on board, you haven't. So it's a long. That's what. This is what ultimately delays a lot of the development and planning in the sector. So if we want to go on to the next slide and look at the need in the community, I'm just going to go through, again, some of the things we talked about earlier. You've got farmers markets, of course, being a space for both farmers to sell as well as a local food hub for buyers. So they serve a couple of different needs in the community. We talked about healthcare, so we're seeing more and more nonprofits pick up the slack of where individuals that don't have access to extended health or medical health or dental health are stepping in to ensure that those individuals have it, usually at low cost or no cost, kind of like a two-tiered or subsidized program. And then there's other things like in the north, certainly nonprofits and social enterprises have sustained those communities when other things like natural resources and businesses have pulled out. So you've got the Skeena Bakery, which you can see in the picture there, came out of the local need of needing a bakery and a coffee shop on the side of the highway. And when they went to start it, they realized that the other need in the community was employment for people facing disabilities. So they are a social enterprise for their employment, but are known for their baked goods and their cinnamon buns, and now I hear ginger snaps, which I hope I get to taste and sample at some point. In other local need, if you want to go to the next slide, we have employment and training, which again is, like I said, targeting demographics that may not have access. So a couple of them are Cleaning Solution and MP Enterprises, which you can see in the pictures there, which are both in the janitorial waste removal, again, low entry, low skill, broad market, lots of players in the market, lots of room to just gain a little piece of the market that can still cover your costs. So both of them, Cleaning Solution is a permanent employer, MP Enterprises is more of a temporary employment, trying to up the skills and employability, and then looking to see them go on to other employment. So that's they'll take individuals for up to 2 years, if not more. Then you've got Pignata, which is there in the middle, and again, as it suggests, it's an Aboriginal organization that both employs and trains Aboriginal individuals, but also goes out and does employment or does training in Aboriginal communities. So again, it's kind of various market need there. On the next slide, we'll look at the mission-based organizations, and this is usually more on the cultural and art side of it, and education, of course. So again, we're seeing more and more organizations, and similar to yourself, even talking about how to educate or consult. That kind of falls in here a little bit. So we've got the Haida Gwaii Education Society, and they are a post-secondary, basically semester away, or semester at sea, as I always call them, for individuals, and they are providing a huge economic component to Haida Gwaii, which obviously doesn't see a lot of economic improvements. So because they use local individuals for training and local elders, and they have a cultural and an environmental component, those individuals that are going into Haida Gwaii every semester, there's about 20 of them per semester, are pumping in about $100,000 into the community each semester, which is pretty amazing. And then again, you've got things like curling clubs and recreation centers that are always hubs for the community, and of course they have to sustain themselves, and they're doing that through the rental of their space or utilizing the excess capacity they have of their space, kitchens, food sales, alcohol sales, that sort of thing, ensuring that their kids or every population in their community has access to arts or to recreation, sports and recreation. And then even things like the Vancouver Aquarium are, of course, have our social component or social enterprise. And the next slide. And ultimately, you have organizations that are looking for a profitability component, and all of three of these are strictly seeking profit businesses that are owned by charities. So you've got the Restores that are owned by Habitat for Humanity. Atira Property Management is here in Vancouver and does exactly that, property management, but all of their profits go back to Atira, which is a women's resource center here in Vancouver. And then you've got organizations like Prince George Aboriginal Friendship Center, who actually have a bunch of different social enterprises, as you can see in the picture. They've got a catering one, but they're on here because they're the largest landowner in Prince George next to the city itself. So they got tired of paying the rent and decided to become a landlord, had the opportunity to become a landlord and own property, and did not need the entire size of the property, so only needed 2 out of 3 floors. And they ultimately rented out those other 2 floors, which paid for the entire mortgage. And so they've used that building to leverage other purchases. So they're a major landowner. Next slide. So just in terms of, and again, normally this I should have said is normally a day-long workshop. So this is, you're getting very high level very quickly in about an hour here. So when I do this in the workshop, we talk about how you're thinking about your value, and basically this is, what are you trying to get out of this activity that you're doing, and how does that affect the organization that you work within or work for. And so a really great resource is the Demonstrating Value website. There's a lot of really great resources. And so in terms of measuring or thinking about a social enterprise, we really start from the end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel, and work our way backwards. So what do you want to perform on? So if you go to the next slide, thinking about the mission impact as well as the business impact. And ultimately, you have to think of the organization that you're working within. So you need to figure out if you're ready for that. And again, this is a big conversation. Clear and shared mission, that's going back to that money, mission, market. Which one is it that you ultimately want to be? Do you want to be strictly seeking profit? Is your focus really mission, or is it a gap in the marketplace? So you need that clear and shared mission, and then a great way to figure out which one of those you want to be or what some of the challenges or opportunities are that you as an organization face is really kind of looking at a SWOT analysis in your environment that you exist within. You need to make sure that your organization has financial systems and human resource systems. If you're going to be doing any kind of employment, or if you're doing purchasing orders or sales, of course, you need to make sure that the systems are in place to take care of that. And ultimately, a learning organization, which means, is your organization already flexible and responsive to the changes in your community? And then from a business and social enterprise side, and I love that, Suzanne, you called yourself the champion, because here we are, you're the champion, which is a key component to this success of social enterprise. Is having that champion, or as I like to call you and will probably call you, is a cheerleader. So it's a really important component of being ready, and then making sure that you and others around you have that business experience to support the path that you're going to go down. So again, you see their ecosystem scan, buy-in. You want to be talking to your stakeholders. You want to make sure that both clients that you serve, as well as other organizations are at least aware of what you're doing and hopefully supportive. And again, the business is going to need systems. As you just talked about, it's expensive to launch when you're ready to launch, and just to consider what that business needs in terms of human resources, as well as other ones in terms of time, capacity, and dollars. Go to the next slide. Of course, you also have to think about the idea and the concept. So in addition to asking your question of what structure should you be, the question we often get is, what idea should we be? What should we be selling in the marketplace? And that's same as the structure. It ultimately comes back to you as an organization and what you're noticing, either that you have that you can offer, something that you might have in excess, something that you might be doing well, something that people are asking you for. Again, depending on what your ultimate goal is. If it's mission, then you might want to be thinking about what value or what impact are you really wanting to have on your community. What are you doing? I always say to organizations, what is it that you're doing right now that achieves the output required, possibly from a contract or from a funding perspective, but how could you take it just a step further that it's able to produce a product or service that could then be sold? Okay, so thinking about that it's not just about training, say 10 people a year, but how could that training actually result in some dollars coming in, whether it's, putting those individuals out to work or doing some contract work, so that's just one example. And then again, of course, are there market opportunities that match the needs? So important to think about, just because you think you have something to offer does not mean that people, organizations, or others are actually going to buy it or buy it regularly enough that it makes it a sustainable business. Okay, next question, next slide.
Kim, I wonder if we could pause there for just a moment,
sure.
Because I know we had a couple of questions about the market opportunity piece that maybe given that it's up on the slide, we could pause here for a moment. I also wanted to check with people about the timing. I know that we had booked you till 1, and I don't want to assume that you're available past 1 or that anyone else on the line is. So maybe we could just do a quick check-in at this point. Do people on the line have time past 1? Kim, do you have time past 1? Or
yeah, I still have a little bit of time.
Okay, great. And what about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, I can definitely stay around.
You can stay a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, great, perfect. And then since we're recording it, we can we can certainly have everything on file for others to watch as well. And Simon, if you have to run, yeah, that's great. Thanks for letting me know.
There's not that much time. I mean, I know there's still a handful of slides left, but they're not. They won't take as long as the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we interrupted you with our questions because we're so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I much prefer it that way. That's why I was saying when I was sending this that I was wondering if maybe it was better just to do a Q&A and then go from there. So that's great. But yeah, what's going on with your market? You were saying.
Yeah, well, let's just pause here for a moment. So I'll just say thank you to you, Simon, in case you do need to log out. I trust you'll just do so when you do need to run. And Suzanne, do you want to just ask a little bit more? I know you were mentioning, certainly with the CSR initiative, or I'm not sure if that's the best name for it. Anyways, this idea that we would certify organizations in becoming more child-friendly. How would we go about, Kim, if you have any resources or know of how we would go about finding out the market demand for a business like that? How do people do that?
Well, I mean, a lot of, and this is where it comes out of what are you doing well, right? So unfortunately, it's a lot of primary research. So you could, and yours is fairly unique from what it sounds to me, which makes it a little bit trickier, right? You can't just go to Small Business BC or the Canada Statistics and look up things. I mean, basically you have to be thinking about who do you think is going to buy this from you, or who do you think is going to want the certification, and talk to them. You're going to have to call them and ask them if it's something that they would ever be interested in and what they might be willing to pay for it. Ultimately, it's that primary research is the hardest part, right? And it might suck a little bit because people might tell you that they're not interested in it. Yeah. But it's really insightful, and it's the most important part. This is the part that is the hardest and the most valuable part for nonprofits. Well, for anyone, even entrepreneurs will tell you this. Most of them skip this and then come back and tell you they wish they had done it. Because it tells you them. It tells you them. Yeah, you're gonna find out one way or the other. Don't you want to find out on the front end rather than the back end, right? So. It's just, it really is talking about finding out if there are similar organizations. Like I said, I don't think there's anyone doing exactly what you guys are proposing to do, but I think there's similar organizations that, certainly have gone to the marketplace with different kinds of certification or different kinds of training and consultation. I think you could talk to other experts, whether it's, like you're saying, maybe school districts or youth professionals or any of that stuff to see what their read on the marketplace might be, or other stakeholders that they work closely with.
Right, maybe HR consultants or HR.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or and like you're saying, even CSR experts, right? So I mean, and they're a really easy group to engage because it falls within their kind of community corporate social responsibility wheelhouse, right? So that's a pretty quick and easy win for them. But like I said, it is the trickier part of it, unfortunately. My advice is, as you'll hear me echoing these last couple of conferences, and don't take it to the marketplace for free. If it's something that's in the marketplace available for free right now, it's going to be really hard to then charge for it. So that's the other thing to be cognizant of as you take these steps forward, that just because people are interested in something for free does not mean they'll be interested in it for purchase. Gotcha. So I think looking at some of those things again, and if it is something that's interested, just for free, then that again is going to tell you that this isn't a business, right? It's a program. So, but ultimately it is talking to those organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
And does ENP or any of the partners you mentioned at the outside of the presentation, would there be funding available to do this kind of thing, or is this something that people just do off the side of their desk as part of the startup?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to do off the side of your desk. It's better to have find funding to bring somebody in, whether that's a part-time, an MBA student, internship. It's definitely in the spectrum of what we would fund. And certainly I'd like to see our funds going to market assessment and market research, so it definitely has potential that way. But having said that, I mean, we're seeing a lot of this space, right? A lot of nonprofits or charities saying that they want to get into consulting and education and training. And in that sense, not a lot of them have been supported in terms of funding, right? We usually push back, and again, and all of our colleagues and all of our stakeholders are saying the same thing, that dollars are not solving, right? Dollars are not building enough capacity, right? That it really is about connecting. So we'll also often go down support, but not necessarily dollars. It's so much more valuable for you to have connections and have guidance and coaching and peer-to-peer learning, that there are dollars available. And this one, like I said, being unique, it might make it more appropriate for dollars, but definitely it's more of the teaching you to fish rather than giving you the fish.
And Suzanne, do you have any follow-up questions about that?
Yeah, I guess that's where we also have this tension, because our social goals, our social ideals are in line with our mission and vision of the nonprofit. But then some of the business ideas we've come up with, I kind of go, but where's the business? You know, we might actually just break even, but we won't actually be generating a profit, which would allow for that support, that sustainable support for the charitable programming, which is, you know, that was the initial need of this organization, to have some kind of sustainable funding source, but also to be able to generate the type of things that we want to create in the world, and not being dependent on, you know, the funders' interests, or, you know, the contractor for the fee for
them telling you. Absolutely. Well, and I mean, self-sustaining is pretty good, right? I mean, like you said, it's not obviously meeting your profitable focus, but clearly that tells me you have a market need, right? And it tells me that it is a money maker. It's just not going to achieve the goal of profitable, right? But it's definitely achieving your other two goals. So then that's just it. When we go through feasibility study, it's not usually that the concept or the idea isn't going to work. It's just that it's not going to meet the goal that it was intended to meet. So either your goals need to change, right? Or the inputs and outputs need to change. Yeah, so that's pretty normal. Like I said, if you're at an idea that you feel like is going to be self-sustaining and break even, then you have to decide if it's serving your other, you know, if it's serving your market or not. If it's not anywhere in your charitable or nonprofit mission, then why would you do it, right? I mean, like you said, the goal isn't to break even, the goal is to make money. But it sounds like it could be a really good activity for you to be doing if it aligns with your mission. If it doesn't, then I say hand it off to a fellow nonprofit and say, here you go, the work's been done, have at her.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. There's always a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, that's almost the problem, right? I mean, it's important to know, and this is what I always say to groups that want those directives, right? But unfortunately, it's good and bad to know that you have all of the possibilities, and there's so many creative solutions and opportunities that, like I said, will ultimately get you to where you want to go. But it might be a little bit of jumping around at the beginning, and you might find some things that you want to pursue, and you might find some things that you don't want to pursue.
Right. Well, I think at this point also it's finding the right opportunities, the right business partners, perhaps, or maybe, you know, partnering with the city or something. That we need to have other interested stakeholders to move it forward.
Right.
So depending on who that is and what their interests are, I think it will probably determine which direction we take.
Absolutely. And I can't stress enough how communication and conversations is absolutely the cornerstone of any of these activities, right? That the more you talk to them, either you're going to get buy-in, you're going to get feedback, right? Like that's the most valuable activity you can be doing, is simply just talking about the idea. To stakeholders.
Okay. So aside from the grants that you offer at ENP, like you know, the education and training is only one part of the bigger idea. Is really a branding, you know, a Child Thrive branding initiative that's similar to, let's say, a LEADS certification or something like this.
Absolutely.
It would be a Child Thrive certification.
Yeah.
So as you say, it is a fair, to my knowledge anyways, it's a fairly unique idea.
Yeah.
Other than the grants available through ENP, how else would we, do you have any other ideas for how else we would get funds to do some of this initial research that's required, the market research that's required?
Yeah, the market research, no, not so much. I mean, you'd have to, certainly I think there's other funders that would be supportive of what the activities that you're talking about.
Right.
Whether or not they would participate in market research, probably not. They might, participate in other aspects of it, but not necessarily under that terminology, market research, right? So you might have to kind of adjust your wording and your intent there, but I think there's a huge focus on youth right now. So I think there's some other possibilities. I think there's a number of possibilities. I think there's a number of connections that could be made that would continue the dialogue and might spark more interest and more support, right? So again, that's the other thing in terms of talking about what you're doing, is that you can get passionate about it, and nothing follows passion more than money, right? So at first, when you're talking to people about your idea and you get passionate about it, that's going to get them excited. It might not turn into dollars immediately, but I guarantee you that will eventually turn into dollars, right? That passion for that idea is either going to turn into a donation or they're going to want to invest in the idea, right? So it's one or the other. And that's why we talk about that, having stories and thinking about performance assessment and what the ultimate impact is. Because if you can get that into a story that you can adjust slightly depending on who your audience is, it will ultimately result in various kinds of support and resources. Yeah.
Very good.
Good, thank you.
Okay, well, we've definitely interjected the slideshow here,
I think I just get into the resources shortly after this.
Okay.
I think I do structure, which we've kind of touched on, and then I think it's just the website, really. So here's the structure.
Okay.
Again, kind of going back to some of your questions of what should or could I be, and what are best practices. And I wouldn't say best practices, but I would say one of them, the most common one, is in-house, right? Because it starts out as really it should have more than one triangle in there, because every nonprofit is doing more than one activity. Is really having those activities in-house, the programs and activities in-house. One of them or all of them starts generating revenue, and it slowly turns in from generating revenue fee-for-service into a full-blown social enterprise. So it usually starts out in-house like that, and could stay that way. Again, if you're wanting to be subsidizing those program costs or self-sustaining that program, you would keep it in-house until forever, potentially, if that's comfortable for you. And of course, self-sustaining doesn't mean that you're not doing more, right? Self-sustaining might mean that you started out with 3 employees and now you've got 10 and now you've got 20 and then you've got 100, but you're still I use my air quotes, just self-sustaining, right? So you could definitely be growing, but still at a break-even level, right? And that is completely acceptable and completely successful. Other ones are social purpose. This usually goes back to festivals or associations, right, where you always know that some dollar, and a lot of, again, up north in rural and remote communities, every activity you do has to essentially cover itself, right, that there's just not enough grants or donations coming in. And the common ones, like I said, are festivals and associations. And then you've got the third one on the next slide, which is the most common, I would say, for charities. Either to start with or to evolve to. So many of them would start with that first one of having the small triangles within, and then getting to a point where you'd have to separate out into this structure. Or if you know right off the bat that it's going to be profitable very early or very quickly, you would want this structure where it's a separately owned entity. And again, that charity, as you can see, it's arm's length. It could be a joint ownership in terms of a charity on its own, or joint with charity with a for-profit or an individual, but it's hands-off, arm's length, 2 separate books, 2 separate boards, 2 separate levels of control, which is good and bad, right? There's pros and cons to all of that. And like I said,
yeah.
those financial examples that I showed you are very much under this structure. In some sense, it's very easy, right? It's very clear cut that people can understand. One's a business, one's a charity. Oh yeah, you make money and you own it, so it goes back to you. Like it's a much more easier concept, I would say. But like I said, it does get complicated in the sense of control and maintaining mission, and do you grow the business or do you grow the profit, right? So kind of that same space of what is it that you're ultimately trying to achieve. And the next slide, I think, just talks a little bit about the legalities. So again, very legal, very allowable. Just need to be aware of regulations under a charity. It has to be related mission. So again, those activities have to be directly related to your charitable mission. Cannot lead with profits, cannot say your intent is to make money. And if it's not related, obviously it has to be hands off, that last slide that we just showed. Destination of funds, so you can't be, if it's within the charity, you can't be holding dollars for endless amounts of time, endless amounts of dollars, and endless amounts of times. That kind of what caught Habitat for Humanity offside, was that they had the Restore within them, and this was part of the problem, that they had to separate them out. They were making too much money. It wasn't going back fast enough into their charitable mission, et cetera, et cetera. So just some things to be aware of. You don't have to make the decision at the beginning. I mean, it's important to be thinking about it, but ultimately it does not need to be made at the beginning, unless very clearly for a charity it's not related, in which case you really do want to be getting ready to set it up outside of the charity, whether that means the charity owns it or whether that means you're also establishing a nonprofit and the three of you, those three entities, work in conjunction. Next slide. Different kinds of money, depending on those structures, there's a different sources of money, obviously. Traditionally, donations, grants. On the rise is sponsorship. If it's the last option, where there's ownership, of course you could have equity. Most of us need to start thinking about debt and how to use that. Again, mortgages or other lines of credit, whatever the type of debt. Patient capital is fantastic. They're really, really patient at asking for their money back, so that's always good capital to have. Launch is not only expensive, it's a long process. So even though launch sounds like it's open the doors and you're done, it's actually a very long process. And of course, sales, that's ultimately part of this process, whether it's to subsidize 30% of the cost, subsidize 50 or 70 or 100% break even, or go beyond that and be profitable. And there's all different sources. The new term I've heard, which I'm enjoying, is called love money, which is from your friends and family. Traditional investors supporting social enterprises along with social impact or angel investors. Credit unions and banks, of course, are always good sources. Credit unions still probably, well, for sure ahead of the game in that sense for social enterprise, banks catching up. Government programs, same thing. Recognizing that social enterprises are ultimately small local businesses, that's what nonprofit businesses are, and therefore ensuring that the programs and support that they have available for small or local businesses are also available to social enterprise. It's not always been the case. We've only seen that change, evolution in the last few years. Of course, there's money from philanthropists and foundations. We're also really good sources of information and connections and collaborations and that sort of thing. And then you've also got things like community or social bonds, which are, again, gaining popularity or attention. And in some ways, it's really it's an expansion of a cooperative model, right, where you're investing and ultimately you're getting something out of it somewhere down the line and still having that community or social impact. Next slide. So into the E&P, again, as I've mentioned, in addition to this workshop, we provide online resources, tons and tons of tools and templates and exercises and case studies. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and I'll show you a picture, a snapshot of the website on the next slide. So this is what it looks like, thanks to our wonderful funders at the government. The day-long workshop is under plan. The Canadian Guide to Social Enterprise is under plan, and the day is based on that guide, which is a fantastic resource and can be downloaded in part or in its entirety for free, and is a really, really good resource for anyone starting, developing in the planning process. If you went through it from cover to cover, you'd be in really good shape for starting a social enterprise. Under Manage, we've got toolkits, so we've got a purchasing toolkit there. Although that one might be under Purchase, we've got our business skills toolkits and our successful employment social enterprise toolkit under Manage. Purchase is where you would find our marketplace, so if you're looking for ideas on who else is a social enterprise or what are they doing, it's a really great resource. It's basically a phone book of social enterprises of where you could be shopping or buying, but also really good to find out if anyone else is doing what you're doing, maybe in another region, or to just give you some ideas of what you could be doing based on what's happening in another region. So if you go on to the next slide, I think it's the business skills toolkit. Oh no, this is the development path. So normally the workshop again goes through readiness, as we touched on today, identification, feasibility study, business plan. So those again are the sections you're going to see under plan and the sections within the guide, as well as the other ones. Strengthening and evaluation, strengthening, again, thinking about having more impact, but not necessarily more dollars, right? So doing the same or more with the same dollars or less dollars. And the next slide.
Just quickly, that's a great layout there. Suzanne, you might already be aware of this, but this is a great plan that we can follow. So thank you for that in particular, Kim. I didn't know that was there, so that's great.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and there's, again, each one of those themes on the website has really great exercises and templates and things to dabble in so that you start building up that expertise.
Wonderful.
And this is the example of it. So again, you can see all those different topics that I mentioned. Legal context at the end. Again, not necessarily that you want to think about it last, but just to be thinking about it. It's not a decision you have to make first, but it's definitely something you want to be thinking about. Under that, it's important to note that there is contact information for our lawyers. He still allows me to share that, so that's up there broad, loud, and clear. If you're looking for some legal advice after you've thought about the other things that are up there, and like we've talked about, where the money's coming from, where the money's going, and how it's ultimately going to be applied to your activities.
Great.
Next slide. So here's one of the toolkits. So this is the business skills toolkit that we developed thanks to the provincial government that fund some of this research. And these are skills that were identified from an advisory committee of professionals around the province and in all different areas of social enterprise and nonprofit. And while the terminology, again, may not always resonate with nonprofits and charities, each one of these are really important spaces for learning, and there's tools and exercises and really valuable resources under each one of those themes. Again, under Manage on the website. If you go to the next slide, I don't know if there's a picture of one, maybe? Nope, next toolkit, the other one that we just completed last year was that employment toolkit. So looking at why social enterprises are more successful at employing people facing barriers than other traditional businesses. So really great information for any HR person, whether you're in the for or nonprofit, but also really important information, you know, pushing the envelope to traditional businesses that they could actually learn something from social enterprise, whereas most of them probably think it's the other way around. So again, each one of these topics has tools and templates and presentations and key links and documents. There's some really great case studies in here for anyone that's in that employment space. And next slide. That's the resource library. So from almost any page on the website, you can search our resources. There's tons and tons there. Search by keyword, you can search by format. There's podcasts and videos, and you could narrow the topic to any one of those things that we just talked about. And then I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is the grants. So just to high level on the next slide. Oh, there's the marketplace that I already talked about under purchase. So again, you can search it, but you could also add, if you know of social enterprise, if you're part of a social enterprise or know of one, you could certainly add it if you're not seeing it in there. Next slide. So this is going to our grant. So again, we do granting, small matching grants, typically to pay for staff or consultants that are intended to work directly on the project. The staff one is a little bit tricky, of course, because you have to be available and competent to do the work. So we do ask for resumes, and we do want to know how the time split is going to work. It's not to be used for operations or implementation, unfortunately, overhead or retroactive. So while these projects are typically longer than my funding round, it needs to be for activities that are from today or from the funding point moving forward, not for activities that were involved prior to that. And if you go on to the next slide, we max out at 10,000, and that's us putting in 10 while you're putting in an equal or greater amount. And that large amount would be rare these days, but if it was going to go out, it would be for a full-blown feasibility study, business plan, or marketing plan. It's usually a lesser amount for some part of that planning process. And the small ones are for the readiness or ideas, but we very rarely do that these days. It's more likely that you would get time with me or another colleague of mine that would kind of go through some of those brainstorming activities with you. Next slide. Oh, last slide. Yeah, so and again, matching, it is a matching grant, so you have to put in an equal or greater amount to us. It's preferred to be in cash, but it does not have to be a cash match. It could be an in-kind match, and that could be in-kind from the consultant. It could be in-kind from the parent organization that you're working within, or some other, possibly your board, depending on what that time looks like. So yeah, sorry, feeling a little rushed. I know we're over the hour, but I think ultimately it was about an hour long. So if there's ever any questions, you can certainly anytime, and I encourage you to reach out to me. We do have grant applications right now. They're about twice a year, although there's discussions about rolling applications and making those dollars and support available when you're ready rather than when we're ready. So I encourage you, if there's any questions, to contact me. Email's the best way, just given that I'm on the road a fair amount, and I can do emails whenever, wherever. So
Great.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Kim. That's excellent.
You're welcome.
This was a good refresher for me. I think when I attended your workshops last time, we were still very far from where we are now, and so it was all kind of abstract. But now that we have a clearer sense of where we are and where we need to go, it's making a lot more sense, and that's where a couple of those slides
That's a really valuable point.
Yeah.
It's when you take it the first time, it's a lot of information overload, and if it's not applicable, it's hard to be thinking about everything. So you're right. It's probably good to take it every little bit along the path to remind.
Yeah, and it didn't sound rushed at all. I hope you don't mind that we intervened with questions as they came up.
Love that. That's the best.
Yeah, and this was really helpful. I learned a lot. I noticed that Simon wrote that he learned a lot as well as he logged out there, and I certainly did also. I had no idea about all the services that you offer. So what an amazing resource.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So is ENP a nonprofit or a social enterprise? Haha.
We are a program within a charity, and we do self-sustain ourselves, but it's not through sales, it's through funding.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Suzanne, any final questions from you at this point?
Yeah, for me it was interesting to learn that ENP also offers supports during brainstorm activities, because I think that, in order to decide a structure, and maybe some of the more the legal aspects of of governance, I think that will require some serious brainstorming for our organization to reach an agreement and something that we think makes the most sense.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot going on the island. I think you have access to a plethora of resources and support and stakeholders. So I think there's a lot of people that would be interested in the activities that you're doing and want to participate. So I think, like I said, I think you've got more options than less.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so for us, it's really about starting the conversation, just getting out there and
exactly. Such a key component, and not to rush it, right? And just to frame that, we were doing before Catalyst last week or a couple weeks ago now. We had actually the same day as the Catalyst, we had Aboriginal Social Enterprise Day, and there was a presentation from a number of our alumni some of them that I just talked about, and all of them said it's a 2-year process for planning. So not even, so just again to help you kind of, you know, think about where you're at or how you compare. 2 years is kind of the average in terms of planning. For better or for worse, I know.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, even just the conversations we've had have been going on for a good 6 months or longer. So
exactly. Yeah. So you're ahead of. Yeah, you're getting there. You're getting there.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we should perhaps wrap it up there. Thanks so much for your generosity, Kim, in terms of your time and sharing your expertise. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you.
I'm sure we will. I look forward to it.
Yeah, that's great. So,
great.
Suzanne,
So
I guess you can stop the recording on